Right. Hey Rob, I'm Klloo. So, I thought we'd do a follow-up video on Maxx because I personally am having a blast with the deck. That is not to say that obviously it has made Maxx super competitive, but it has helped him along. So, according to Fabry, right, he's 28%, which is pretty awful. He is actually the lowest of all the heroes, although he has more play than, say, Klloo or Betsy or some of the other, bottom barrel, right? Now, overall, the Armory deck has definitely added a lot of value to Max's game plan and helped him along to be somewhat better. Now, overall, I've got about 30 games, so 25 on this list that I've settled on, right, that I'm having a great time with, right, and then a few games with just straight out of the box, and then a few tweaks still trying to run the majority of the new cards. So overall, I do feel that Maxx has gotten better, but he's still not at that point where he can obviously be a proper competitive hero. So I thought, why don't we look into why, right? Starting off, of course, with the new cards. So, Max's Armory deck brings with it a total of 8 new pieces, so to speak, right? Construct Bankbreaker being a playable card, and then Bankbreaker actually being the usable weapon is, whether or not you count it as an extra card or 7 overall. But still, overall, this is a nice package of things to try and help shore up Hyperdriver's and Max's Wrench. Now, where does it all sit? Well, in my opinion, we have our great pieces that really help Max's overall game plan. We have our okay pieces that are still kind of a bit too conditional in terms of actually really getting the value out of them. And then we have fundamentally the bait pieces, right? The pieces that I would like to love, but definitely fall short of what they are probably intended to do, right? So our great pieces, our Breaker Helm Protoss, our Fist Pump, and our Clamp Press. You can sort of look there, right, to do with Banksy, which is a big significant part of Max's game plan, and then Breaker Helm Protoss is just a nice flexible card. We have our Drive Break and Twin Tech Charging Station as our OK. Again, they rely on having hyperdrivers in certain zones, right? You have to boost a hyperdriver in order to get the value out of Drive Break. And then our fundamentally slow cards, our Puffer Jacket, and of course our Construct Bankbreaker along with Bankbreaker. So what makes the good cards good? Well, Breaker Helm Protoss is essentially 2 outs for a bad hand, right? So taking the whole 9 hyperdrivers along with Clamp Press, you can, every now and then, double draw. Or you have an established board and you draw a hyperdriver that you don't necessarily want to play. So having Breaker Helm Protoss as a way to get out of this tricky situation, right? Not just in terms of its block value, but actually just cycling that card that you can't block with, right, to get rid of it in that sense, or play. So, generally speaking, those 2 outs really shore up Max's overall strategy. It turns those really awful turns into something now workable. So, for that reason, I think Breaker Helm Protoss is probably my favorite card from the new cards in the Armory deck, right? Now, it being a base head, I don't think is worth it. I would rather the 2 chances to cycle hyperdrivers than to actually convert it to a Evo headpiece. Now, most people's favorite will probably be Clamp Press. So Clamp Press and Fist Bump are great, right? They add a lot of value to Banksy, and that is basically the fundamental mechanic of Maxx. You want to either play an item to crank or Maxx, and then use Banksy to pressure, right? And the Steam counter, along with Clamp Press, is a ton of value. So Clamp Press, putting Banksy to a 5 is already fantastic, and then the fact that it becomes a must block to your opponents because you get that Steam counter to upkeep Clamp Press is really strong. Now, in terms of Fist Bump, right? I said I didn't like Drive Break. Well, Fist Bump is kind of similar, right? It's a very conditional thing, but the alternatives to the slot is what you should really try to rationalize, right? We can take something a bit more defensive, or we can take Fist Bump, and every now and then we turn our 3 into a 4 that upkeeps a hyperdriver. So if our opponent has to block it out, right? They're using 2 cards or a card and equipment, that's good value. Or it's just allowing us to get over the top of how our opponent has normally planned to deal with Banksy and then upkeep that hyperdriver. So both these cards impacting that main aspect of Max's strategy is fantastic, and yeah, they're definitely, right, in my opinion, the 3 cards that you will run as Maxx from the Armory deck. Now, in terms of the conditional, right, so we have our Drive Break. Now, in theory, should be fantastic, right? It is essentially a 10 block piece, right? Now, obviously, you're not realistically going to hit all 9 hyperdrivers from boosting, but still, anywhere between, 1 and 10 should average out to a decent amount of block. But in all honesty, I have found too often that Drive Break is just not up when I want it, right? So, but what I have noticed at the same time is I would love an action point, right? I would love the flexibility to not have to crank the Hyperdriver that I played from Maxx because I've played one from hand and I'm just getting that stockpile value, or maybe not have to boost a card, or even just use it with one of those other mech pieces that don't have boost, like our Mechanetic Shockwave, right? So, altogether, although I want to love Drive Break, I think I am going to swap it out, probably for Heavy Industry Gear Shift, since it still has that one Battle Worn, but then on top of that, I have the ability to gain that action point. Now, Achilles Accelerator, just being your Arcane Barrier, is also fundamentally great, right? Usually I swap out the Breaker Helm Protos, right, for an Adaptive Dissolver when I need the AB, but I think, in all honesty, I'd rather swap out Drive Break and, again, keep the Helm for those 2 outs when I do draw back. Now, in terms of our Twin Tech Charging Station, this, again, relies on us having that Hyperdriver in our graveyard. Now, that implies that we've played a Hyperdriver, so altogether, you have to get through 2 to 3 steps before you can really make use of Twin Tech Charging Station. Getting that +1 in resource is absolutely fantastic. Now, stat-wise, a 0 for 3 is also fine. The problem with it is that 2 block, right? This and BIOS Update are the main buffs I'm running, and generally speaking, they're the cards that I want to block with first and foremost, because I need that boost, right, in order to kickstart my turn, in order to then use Max's ability to then use Banksy. So having Twin Tech Charging Station being this 2-block letdown is really, really unfortunate in my opinion, right? I wish it was also a bit more synergistic. It wasn't just targeting it from the graveyard, it was targeting it from the banish zone. That would be fantastic, because I also really like running Hyper Scrapper, right? As a blue that I can pitch, and then late game, I can use it with either Clamp Press or the Hyperdriver, so I'm trying to get to that 6 resource value. And it's just fundamentally, to me, better than Big Bertha or Crankshaft, or even the Street Hoons, whatever it is, right? The one that LSS are prompting us to take. I do run it now and then, but overall, I really like Hyper Scrapper for the late game, trying to really close it out, because getting those 6 resources is at least a guarantee of being able to Max and Banksy, let alone if I have potentially, a 1-cost boost that I really want to play. It really shores up once I've started to run out of upkeeping Hyperdrivers. And then again, it being 3 block and a blue pitchfork is fantastic. So I would rather keep my Hyperdrivers in the graveyard for Hyper Scrapper than to use them, in all honesty, with our Twin Tech Charging Station. That's not to say it is a bad card. Again, both this and Drive Break are definitely decent cards. It's just, I think I'd rather the alternative than what they actually represent. Then, for our bad cards, right? Our bait cards. So Puffer Jacket and our Bank Breaker. To be honest, Puffer Jacket, I really, really wanted to love. The fact that it opens up the ability to play all of our Hyperdrives and get that extra value. It is essentially, if you're playing all the Hyperdrivers, that's 9 resources. So that is a lot of value through Puffer Jacket, plus then you have the Temper 2, so that's still comparable to a Klloo Foundry Art. Problem is, it's locked behind that variance, right? Are we going to find our Hyperdrivers? Are we going to be able to play the Hyperdrivers? If this was not non-token, if this was all Hyperdrivers, this would be absolutely disgusting, right? In fact, I would say scrap the block, just make it all Hyperdrivers get that 1 extra Steam counter, and it would be perfect. It would really shore up Max's overall design, but in essence, it doesn't compare to Klloo Foundry Art, which was pointed out to me as the better card, right? So Klloo Foundry Art, just kickstarting Max's game plan, getting those Hyperdrivers on board, and shoring up the turns that you don't find the 3 resources to Max and Banksy is just fundamentally better than trying to rely on, again, finding the Hyperdrivers to play, not boosting them away, not having to discard them, and then get that value out of Puffer Jacket. As for Construct Bankbreaker, again, to me, this was a standout card in theory, because it shores up some of the weaknesses of Maxx. It gives us a nice big wrench that we can dump resources into once we have that stockpile of Hyperdrivers, right? We're putting out a Hyperdriver, so we're losing that value, so by having that extra swing, we're equating it to still having a 1 for 3, right? Which is still fairly decent to me, but overall, it's 2 steps forwards and 3 steps back, literally, right? We get 2 swings, but we give up 3 Hyperdrivers to set it up, and that is awful, right? To lose that board state, because we're not realistically getting to full Hyperdrives where we can keep one on board so that we still have the resources next turn to use Bankbreaker. No, we're giving up all the momentum that we've built to establish Bankbreaker, and that to me is a big letdown. I really wish that this card was not exactly 3, it was up to, so that you could leave 1 Hyperdriver on board and still get some level of value for Bankbreaker. Just having even 1 charge, right, of Banksy itself to then have that next turn of 2 swings to try to close out a game would be a lot better. But it's just not that, right? It is give up everything that you've established for little payoff, in my opinion, right? So both these cards I really, really want to love, and I really, really gas them up, but they fall short, right? In a game like Flesh and Blood that is, again, built around strategic use of all your pieces, having these types of cards just doesn't fundamentally work. We want to rely on Maxx and we want to swing with Banksy, and both these cards limit our easeability in order to actually achieve that. So then going back to the list that I've settled on, right? So we have Maxx, we have Banksy, we have our Breaker Helm Protoss, Drive Break, Fist Bump, and our Klloo Foundry Heart. Then in terms of the cards we're actually playing, I am taking essentially 60 cards and a full sideboard that I will always put into the deck, because the big issue with the current meta is definitely fatigue and running out of cards. So everything in this deck is always run, right? And then now the habit, again, I've been swapping out Breaker Helm Protoss for our Adaptive Resolver or Visitronic, Model I, when I need that extra surge protection against Wizard, right? So it's done okay. Again, it's not stellar. It's at 40% with 25 games, right? So we've got a nice plethora of heroes. So we obviously have the really bad matchups. Assassin, terrible. You fatigue me, I fatigue me, and then you also destroy my hand and everything I want to do. It's an awful time, but I did manage a few wins. Generally speaking, the wins that I have scraped by on is generally because of Clamp Press, right? Clamp Press is on board and the opponent just doesn't know how to deal with it, which is something that will obviously quickly change as people understand what Maxx is going for, the value that Clamp Press represents through Banksy and upkeeping it every single turn. They will deny Banksy and they will deny the upkeep for Clamp Press. So I'm not looking forward to the following weeks, right? Again, because Maxx is seeing a decent chunk of play, but there are still, again, decent wins against Arachne, Aurora, right? I did high roll, I out-aggroed Aurora, which was fantastic. So it does work, but it's just, again, subject to a decent chunk of variance because, well, you're looking for 9 specific cards in your deck to really, really kickstart a lot of what you're trying to do. Now, standout cards for me, personally, is definitely Super, right? This, with the token that we're generating through Maxx, is easy enough to destroy through boosting. So Super Up being a 0-for-4 go again is fantastic. And then also having that flexibility with something like Clamp Press, where we're out of steam counters, we know it's going to be destroyed, and this is definitely fringe, but still, being able to galvanize and get that 4 block by sacrificing the Clamp Press that will, again, be destroyed on my upkeep is phenomenal, feels fantastic, right? So I like Super Up very much. Again, I also really like Hyper Scrapper, being able to get those 6 resources to then at least go into the 3. It feels like you're wasting them, but still, it's really nice. And I do take Gas Up, although this is definitely a questionable card to me. Again, being that 2-block value, right? Unlike Bios Update, which is just solid stats all around, plus then the really, really solid effect. Gas Up at least interacts with the hyper drivers that we have banished, so either through Hyper Scrapper, getting them out of the graveyard into the banish zone, a late game Gas Up is pretty solid, right? And then a 1 for +4 is also pretty decent, right? In conjunction with our High Speed Impact, where I end up buffing High Speed Impact, and then follow up with a Jump Start or a Zipper Hit, just to get that chip damage, because a big part of the game plan is getting our opponent low enough where we are destroying their hand every single turn. And straight back and forth, unfortunately, Maxx just doesn't have the same ratio of damage that we see in, say, Syndra or Aurora. So you have to make up through, some level of disruption, and all we have really is T-Bone, which there's plenty of equipment nowadays that you're not going to hit a truly strong piece unless you get double T-Bone in a turn. Even our Pulse Wave Harpoon or our Mechanetic Shockwave, right, they are fun to use and they do land every now and then, but generally speaking, right, they don't land as well as I'd like with everything, with the game state that we're currently up to. But still, nonetheless, right, I will put this in the description if you want to try this, although I will be most likely tweaking it because I'm enjoying Maxx and I want to play around and see what exactly it can do. So for instance, Gas Up is probably out. What else? Maybe the yellow High Speed Impact. The cards I'm looking to swap in, maybe run Heist, but I really don't like having those big cost cards because I want the resources, especially late game, to not have to Klloo Foundry Heart and still be able to Maxx and Banksy, right? So Heist, although it's a solid hit, it's 2 for 5, so that's a good breakpoint, right? So it is nice, especially once we have the hyperdrives established, but I don't know if I can, right? Same with like Crankshaft and Big Bertha. They're not worth the trade-off. I'd rather just a really true aggro deck that I can play almost every single card in my hand every single turn and just keep the pressure on. I think, generally speaking, it's super easy to get to 15 to 16 damage every single turn, pressuring your opponent, which is phenomenal. Feels fantastic to pull off. Again, equipment-wise, I'm almost tempted to stick in Quick Dodge Flexor just because, in terms of blocking, especially for obviously a wide match, quick dodge flexes is a lot better than our drive break, in all honesty, and I do run a decent chunk of blues or yellows where I can get, again, 4 block value or 6 block value out of it, and I'm happy. Even the 2 block value is still kind of nice, especially in AB like a Veridance, where I want to be able to block attacks and also have the resources to pitch, right? Otherwise, just an action point, and then not having to, for instance, if I can double play Hyperdrivers because I'm out of our Breaker Helm Protoss, then that feels good to me, right? Not having to crank both of the Hyperdrives in order Banksy. So altogether, again, I've had a solid time with it. Right, so what have I learned playing Maxx? Well, it is always correct to go first. At bare minimum, we are trying to establish one Hyperdriver with 2 charges through Maxx's ability. So altogether, this start against Kasai is phenomenal, right? We have an attack to boost, which means we can use Maxx's ability. Then we have Klloo Foundry Heart to shore up our resources, meaning that I can get in play both the Hyperdrive from hand as well as Maxx and also Arsenal card. That is the best start we could probably ask for as Maxx, right? Maybe a slight difference being a red Hyperdriver or a Clamp Press even. But altogether, phenomenal. This has allowed me to maintain pressure against Kasai, and this has straight been just an aggro back and forth of trading blows, which is phenomenal. That's what I enjoy most when it comes to Flesh and Blood. But what it has allowed us to do, especially with that Hyperdriver start, is in a low-cost deck like what I'm running, we can essentially block with 1 card, play 3, and then hopefully have enough resources through the Hyperdrivers to Maxx and Banksy. Now, all we have to get to is 2 resources because we have that Klloo Foundry out. So the majority of turns, we have been attacking 4 times, sometimes 5 times, right? And that has allowed me to remain in control of this match and close it out just as straight aggression. Finding a Hyperdriver is also fundamentally powerful because it allows us to essentially Banksy for 1 less resource, meaning if we have a Hyperdriver on board, plus Klloo Foundry Heart, we can play a Hyperdriver from hand, crank it, and then swing with Banksy, still allowing us to get a decent amount of attacks across, so red or yellow Hyperdrivers then carries on to the next turn, which is definitely phenomenal. But again, all we're doing is keeping up the pressure, and we can deliver easy 15 to 16 damage turns consistently, back and back, and still every now and then have a 3 block or 4 block turn and maintain our HP. So overall, Maxx is a solid aggro deck, but he does kind of fall short of where Syndra and Aurora kind of benchmark. Now, Syndra, is easier to shut down, right, than Aurora, so Maxx does, in my opinion, sit a bit better than Syndra, but altogether, it still falls short of what the current meta demands, and I do wish some of the cards were tuned a little bit better, because the other big issue we have is fatigue. So look at this, 112 damage dealt and consistent turns of at least 15 damage. That is beautiful. But once we get that jump start, it's just a snowball effect. Now, in terms of fatigue, I've ran into a fair amount of Jarls and Verdances. So altogether, that really picks apart our deck, because if the opponent can just block and stall us out, we will eventually just fatigue ourselves. So against this Verdance, we've cut it really close, unfortunately. Obviously, I've lost my Arcane Barrier. I really shouldn't have popped it, but still, they just Storm Striders here, and they can run us over before we can deal that one final bit of damage. Not that we have the best hand, because all I can do is Crankshaft into our Maxx ability, into our Banksy, right? Or a following turn, Hyperdrive into a Banksy. So altogether, we just don't have fundamentally enough pieces to continue that sequence, right? We have to crank in order to swing with Banksy, and to use Maxx in order to crank, we have to at least boost, meaning that we will fundamentally just fall short of that goal once time permits, right? Once we've run through our deck. So our opponent can definitely wait you out, right? You just don't have enough pressure for that. But if we look at the damage, right? I've still had very consistent turns of, again, around 15 damage. Falling short every now and then, right? Having to potentially deal with, for instance, fouling or plow, right? But generally speaking, it's been really solid. Now, I also have this game against a Jarl, right? We pressured 141 damage, end up dealing 44 damage. So overall, that is a lot, right? It is a solid aggro deck, right? I have no doubt that Maxx is decent. He just falls short of what the current meta demands, right? Aurora gets by because of that split damage, allowing you to pick apart your opponent's hand once you have those big arcane turns with Arc Lightning. So overall, I do fundamentally really enjoy Maxx, but he still needs a little bit of tweaking. A lot of the cards kind of fall flat because they're subjective to these limitations, right? Hyperdrives have to be in X zone, they have to be banished, or they have to be in your graveyard, rather than having that flexibility of being from either or, right? If a Twin Tech charging station was from either, that would be fantastic. If some of the armor pieces weren't just from, say, boosting, they synergize with other banishes, that would be fantastic as well, right? Your opponent banishing a Hyperdriver, an assassin banishing your Hyperdriver, and all of a sudden you get to reuse your boots. That would have been phenomenal but they are balanced. And that current balance around trying to keep Maxx in check means he doesn't quite stand up to the current meta. So hopefully, if it slows down, if he gets just a few more staple pieces, or Mech just gets a few more staple pieces come high seas, he will potentially be a nice, solid aggro deck. Anyway, that's my thoughts again. Kind of new to Mech, so hope you enjoyed. Tell me what else I can do to make it better, because I really do enjoy playing Maxx. There.